Imagine the unimaginable, a young soldier, driven by duty, love for his family, and the sheer will to survive in a land torn apart by relentless conflict. His life is abruptly cut short, not once, not twice, but 3 times, only for him to miraculously return. Each time he came back, it wasn't just with breath in his lungs, but with a truth so chilling, so profound, that it could only come from a place beyond our earthly existence. This is the story of Youssef, a Palestinian soldier who crossed the threshold of life and death and returned with a message that will forever change the way you view life, war, and what lies beyond. Youssef was no stranger to hardship. Born into a world where every sunrise brought the possibility of conflict, he grew up with a fierce determination to protect his family and his homeland. His days were a blend of relentless training, long patrols, and moments of fleeting joy shared with his loved ones. Though he wore the uniform of a soldier, his heart longed for peace. He often whispered silent prayers under the stars, asking for a day when the sound of laughter could drown out the echoes of gunfire. To Youssef, his role wasn't just about fighting, it was about surviving for his family. He was the eldest son, a brother, and a protector. Every step he took in his military boots was a step toward ensuring his younger siblings had a future. He didn't see himself as a hero, just a man trying to keep his family safe in a world that seemed to conspire against them at every turn. But Youssef could not have anticipated the extraordinary twist his life was about to take. The stakes had always been high, but nothing could prepare him for the events that would lead him to face death itself and come back to tell the tale. This wasn't just a story of survival. It was a journey into the unknown, a place of unspeakable truths that would haunt him long after he returned. The harrowing event that changed everything started as an ordinary mission, one Youssef had carried out countless times before. But this time something went wrong, something unspeakable. As he prepared for what seemed like a routine operation, Youssef couldn't shake the feeling that his life was on the edge of an irreversible shift. And he was right. The sun was beginning to set over the hills, casting long shadows across the barren landscape. Youssef and his unit had been tasked with securing a checkpoint near the outskirts of a contested area. The mission was straightforward, almost monotonous: check vehicles, maintain order, and move on. But war has a way of turning even the most mundane tasks into nightmares. The tension was palpable as the convoy approached. The air was heavy with the scent of dust and diesel fuel. The hum of engines was punctuated by the occasional crackle of static from the radios. Youssef adjusted his helmet and scanned the horizon. Years of experience had honed his instincts, and something about this moment didn't feel right. He tightened his grip on his rifle, his senses on high alert. Then it happened. A deafening explosion shattered the stillness, ripping through the air like a thunderclap. The force of the blast hurled Youssef off his feet, slamming him into the ground. His ears rang with a high-pitched whine as chaos erupted around him. Smoke and flames consumed the convoy, and the acrid stench of burning rubber and metal filled his nostrils. Shouts of panic and cries for help cut through the haze. Youssef struggled to push himself up, his body screaming in pain. His vision blurred as he tried to make sense of the carnage. Soldiers scrambled to pull the wounded to safety, but the ambush was far from over. Gunfire erupted from the surrounding hills, the sharp crack of rifles echoing in a deadly rhythm. Youssef instinctively reached for his weapon, his training kicking in despite the shock. And then, everything went black. The medics who reached him later would say his heart had stopped. For over a minute, Youssef was gone, his pulse absent, his body lifeless. Clinically dead, they declared. But this was only the beginning. As the chaos of battle raged on, something extraordinary was happening to Youssef, something beyond the understanding of science or reason. His comrades fought desperately to revive him, their voices distant and frantic. And just when it seemed all hope was lost, Youssef's chest rose with a sudden gasp. His heart beat again, but the man who opened his eyes wasn't the same. He had seen something terrifying. And this was only the first time. What lay ahead would not only change his life forever, but would force him to confront truths that few dare to imagine. Youssef's journey into the afterlife had only just begun. Youssef's consciousness drifted, untethered from the chaos of the battlefield. The last thing he remembered was the sharp sting of pain and the weight of his body crumbling to the ground. But now, that pain was gone. He felt weightless, as though every chain binding him to the physical world had dissolved. He floated above his own lifeless form, seeing the frenzied efforts of his comrades and the medics. Their hands pressed against his chest in desperation, their voices shouting commands and prayers into the smoke-filled air. Yet he felt no urge to return. A strange sense of calm enveloped him, pulling him higher, away from the carnage. The world below grew dim, its colors fading into shades of gray, while above him, a warm, radiant light beckoned. It wasn't harsh like sunlight, but soft and inviting, as though it carried the very essence of love and peace. Youssef felt drawn to it, unable to resist its pull. The further he ascended, the more the noises of war, the shouts, the explosions, the cries, faded into a distant hum. As he passed through the veil of light, he entered a realm that defied earthly comprehension. Colors seemed alive, shifting and flowing in ways that no human eye could perceive. The air, if it could be called air, was thick with a serenity that seeped into his very being. He felt as though he were seeing the world for the first time, but from a perspective unburdened by fear or doubt. Yet, beneath this surreal beauty, an undercurrent of foreboding lingered. The tranquility felt fragile, as if a darker truth lay hidden just out of sight. Youssef's calm turned to unease. He was no longer floating aimlessly. The light was leading him somewhere that demanded his presence. As he moved forward, a question formed in his mind. Why am I here? What is this place? He tried to speak, but his voice echoed silently within him, as though the answers were waiting just beyond his reach. He was no longer just a man. He was a traveler, embarking on a journey into the unknown. And deep inside, he knew this was only the beginning. The light softened, and Youssef found himself standing in a vast, boundless expanse. The ground beneath his feet shimmered like liquid glass, reflecting the infinite sky above. The air buzzed with energy, alive with an unspoken harmony. But this was no paradise. The serenity he had felt before was replaced by an overwhelming sense of awe and dread. Before him, figures began to emerge, their forms translucent and glowing. Some radiated peace, their faces serene, their movements graceful. They seemed weightless, as though unburdened by the troubles of life. These souls stood together in clusters, exchanging glances filled with love and understanding. But among them were others, shadows darker than the light around them. These souls seemed restless, their movements erratic. Their faces were etched with pain, their forms contorted as if they were carrying the weight of an unseen burden. They wandered alone, avoiding the light, as though it burned them. Their agony was palpable, and Youssef felt it deep within his own spirit. Youssef tried to move toward the peaceful souls, but something stopped him. From the horizon, towering figures appeared, their forms shrouded in an ethereal glow. These beings were neither human nor wholly divine, their presence commanding reverence. Their faces were indistinct, as though they were both everything and nothing at once. Yet their gaze pierced him, leaving him exposed. One of the beings stepped forward, its presence radiating authority. It raised a hand, and the entire realm seemed to hold its breath. Without words, Youssef understood. These were the judges, the guardians of this place. Their role was not to punish, but to reveal, to strip away every layer of a soul's existence and expose its truth. Images began to flash before Youssef's eyes. Memories of his life unfolded in vivid detail, from moments of kindness to acts of anger and regret. He saw his family, his comrades, and strangers whose lives he had touched, for better or worse. Each scene felt raw, unfiltered, as though it were being presented not just to him, but to the beings before him. And then a voice, not spoken but felt, echoed through him. Every action has its weight. Every choice has its consequence. Do you see now? Youssef tried to respond, but the words failed him. He could feel the eyes of the beings boring into his soul, waiting for his acknowledgement. He realized that this journey wasn't just about him. It was about humanity. This realm wasn't simply a destination. It was a reflection of the choices made in life, the paths taken, and the truths ignored. As the beings stepped back, Youssef felt an intense pull. The light around him dimmed, and he realized that his time here was limited. But what had he learned? What was he meant to carry back with him? The answers were within reach, but the questions lingered, growing heavier with every passing moment. The journey wasn't over. The truths revealed here would follow him back, shaping the man he would become and the message he would deliver. Youssef stood at the threshold of two realms. His vision split between the unimaginable beauty of paradise and the horrifying abyss of torment. He felt pulled in both directions, as though his very soul was being stretched across the duality of existence. The stark contrast left him breathless, not with fear, but with a profound awareness that these realities were inseparable, two sides of the same eternal truth. To his left, the realm of light unfolded in breathtaking splendor. Golden fields stretched infinitely, swaying gently under a breeze that carried the scent of blossoms untouched by time. The sky shimmered with hues that defied description, and an overwhelming sense of peace washed over him. Youssef's heart ached with recognition as figures began to emerge from the light. They were people he had loved and lost. His grandfather, who had been a pillar of wisdom in his childhood, approached him with a serene smile. An uncle who had passed too soon extended his hand in welcome. Even neighbors and friends, whose deaths had been mourned in silence during years of conflict, appeared whole, vibrant, and filled with joy. Each embrace carried warmth and a love so pure it brought tears to his eyes. In this realm, there was no pain, no war, no suffering. Conversations weren't spoken, but shared through an unspoken connection of thought and emotion. Youssef felt as though he had been made whole again, his earthly burdens melting away. Yet, just as he began to lose himself in the serenity, his gaze was drawn to the other side. To his right, the light dimmed into a bleak, suffocating darkness. The air grew heavy, and the cries of anguish pierced his soul. He saw a landscape devoid of life, littered with shadows writhing in agony. This was no metaphor. It was a reality far too vivid to deny. The souls here were not at rest. They were consumed by the weight of their earthly actions. Youssef saw faces twisted in pain, their hands reaching out as if grasping for a salvation that would never come. Some were bound in chains forged from their own greed and hatred, dragging them deeper into the abyss. Others wandered aimlessly, their cries echoing with regret. He could feel their suffering as though it were his own, a pain that transcended the physical and pierced his spirit. It was then that Youssef understood the duality of the afterlife. Light and darkness, love and suffering. They existed not in isolation, but as reflections of the choices made in life. For every act of kindness, there was a ripple of peace. For every act of harm, a consequence. The afterlife was not a single destination, but a continuum shaped by the legacy one leaves behind. Youssef turned back to the realm of light, yearning to stay in its embrace. But he knew now that his journey was far from over. The truth he had witnessed demanded to be carried back. There was more to learn, more to see, and a message that had yet to be revealed. The air around Youssef shifted, growing still yet charged with an unseen energy. From the brilliance of the light emerged a figure unlike any he had encountered. This was no ordinary soul or spiritual being. It was a presence of overwhelming authority, radiating an inner light so powerful it seemed to bend the very fabric of the realm. Youssef instinctively fell to his knees, not out of fear but reverence. The being's form was difficult to define, as though it existed beyond the constraints of shape or matter. Yet its eyes, or what felt like eyes, locked onto Youssef's, and in that gaze, he felt every emotion he had ever known. There was no need for words, but when the being spoke, its voice resonated directly within his soul. "Youssef," the being began, its tone both gentle and firm, "you have seen what lies beyond. But this is not your time. You must return, for there is much that humanity must understand, and you are to be the one to carry this truth." Youssef tried to respond, but his thoughts were already being answered, as if the being could read the questions forming in his mind. Images began to flood his vision, scenes of the world he had left behind. He saw villages reduced to rubble, families torn apart by war, and the hollow faces of children robbed of their innocence. He witnessed acts of greed and betrayal, the suffering of the oppressed, and the unchecked destruction of the earth. "This is the path humanity treads," the being continued. "War and hatred, fueled by fear and pride, have set the world ablaze. But it is not too late. You must return to warn them, to remind them of the light that still burns within." Youssef's heart sank as he saw the weight of human suffering laid bare. Yet, amidst the despair, the being showed him moments of hope, small acts of kindness, courage, and love that shone like beacons in the darkness. These moments, though fleeting, carried the power to transform. "The light and the darkness coexist," the being said, "but it is through your choices that one triumphs over the other. Tell them this: every action matters. Every soul has the capacity for redemption. But time is fleeting, and the consequences of inaction grow heavier with each passing day." Youssef's spirit trembled under the enormity of the task before him. The being's final words echoed in his soul: "Go now and speak the truth. Warn them of what you have seen, and remind them of what lies beyond." In an instant, the light around him surged, and Youssef felt himself being pulled back, his journey into the unknown coming to an end. But the weight of the message and the urgency of its warning remained etched in his soul, ready to be delivered to the living. As the light dimmed and the realm of souls faded, Youssef found himself surrounded by a strange stillness. It was neither the comforting tranquility of the paradise he had glimpsed, nor the suffocating dread of the abyss. Instead, it was a space that seemed to exist for him alone, a place of reckoning. Without warning, a series of images began to unfold before him, as though an unseen hand was turning the pages of a book he had written but never read. These were scenes from his own life, each moment meticulously preserved. He saw himself as a young boy, playing with his siblings in the dusty streets of his village, his laughter echoing with unfiltered joy. Then the images shifted. He was older now, carrying the weight of responsibility, his hands trembling as he wiped away his mother's tears after his father's death. The memories grew sharper, more intimate. Youssef saw himself comforting a scared child during a raid, offering his own meager ration of food to a starving stranger, and whispering prayers for peace under the cover of night. These moments of kindness shone like stars in the darkness, their warmth filling him with a sense of purpose. But the images didn't stop there. Shadows crept into the visions, and Youssef was forced to confront the darker aspects of his life. He saw himself shouting in anger at a fellow soldier, his words laced with bitterness. He relived the moment he struck an enemy combatant out of rage, the man's eyes pleading before they closed forever. Each act of anger and regret played out in excruciating detail, leaving Youssef unable to look away. He realized that these actions, both good and bad, had woven the fabric of his spiritual path. His kindness had brought light, but his anger had left scars on others and on himself. The being's words echoed in his mind. Every action has its weight. Every choice has its consequence. For the first time, Youssef truly understood the duality within him. He was not purely light nor purely darkness, but a mixture of both, like every other soul. This revelation was deeply humbling, yet it also carried a sense of empowerment. He had the ability to choose which path to follow, to either add to the suffering in the world or to diminish it. In that moment, Youssef felt connected to something far greater than himself. His life wasn't just his own. It was a thread in the vast tapestry of humanity. Every choice he made rippled outward, affecting the lives of others in ways he could never fully comprehend. With this newfound understanding, Youssef knew that the time to change was now. He couldn't rewrite the past, but he could shape the future, and he had been given a second chance to do so. Youssef's journey through the unknown was abruptly interrupted by a force that gripped his very essence. The peaceful stillness shattered as he felt himself being pulled downward, back toward the physical world. The light around him dimmed, replaced by a suffocating darkness. His soul screamed in protest, yearning to stay in the realm of truth and clarity, but the pull was relentless. Suddenly, pain surged through his body like a tidal wave. It was as though every nerve had been reignited at once, dragging him out of the ethereal and slamming him into the harsh reality of the physical world. He gasped for air, his lungs burning as though they hadn't breathed in years. His chest heaved violently, and his vision was a blur of fluorescent lights and frantic faces. "Youssef, he's breathing," a voice shouted. It was distant at first, but it grew clearer as his senses clawed their way back. Doctors and nurses surrounded him, their expressions a mixture of disbelief and relief. Machines beeped erratically, their tones reflecting the chaos of his sudden revival. His family, who had been summoned to say their final goodbyes, stood frozen in shock. His mother clutched her chest, tears streaming down her face as she whispered prayers of gratitude. His younger brother, who had idolized Youssef, stood in the corner, his mouth agape, as though he couldn't believe what he was seeing. Youssef's body was weak, battered from the injuries he had sustained and the medical interventions that had tried to save him. Every movement felt like a monumental effort, his muscles screaming with fatigue. But his mind was alive, brimming with memories of the afterlife. Every vision, every word from the messenger, every glimpse of light and darkness was seared into his consciousness. The medical staff struggled to make sense of his recovery. He had been declared clinically dead, his heart silent and his body motionless. By all logic, he shouldn't have come back, and even if he did, they had feared he would be left in a vegetative state. Yet here he was, awake and aware. Youssef's voice was faint, barely more than a whisper, but the first words he uttered sent chills through the room. "I saw it. I saw what's beyond." His mother leaned in closer, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and hope. "What did you see, Youssef?" she asked, her voice trembling. Youssef closed his eyes, the weight of his experience pressing down on him. "The truth," he murmured, "about life, about us, about what comes next." The room fell silent, the gravity of his words sinking in. For Youssef, this was just the beginning of a new chapter. He had returned to a world that would struggle to understand the truth he carried. But he knew he couldn't stay silent. The messenger's warning echoed in his mind, urging him to share what he had seen and felt. Even as his body healed, Youssef understood that his spirit had been forever changed. He had been granted a second chance, not just to live but to guide others toward the light. And he would not let that chance slip away. Youssef sat in the quiet of his family's living room, his hands trembling as he clasped a cup of tea. His mother sat across from him, her eyes filled with a mix of concern and love. His siblings hovered nearby, their youthful curiosity battling the fear of what their brother might reveal. The silence was thick, and Youssef knew he had to begin. "I need to tell you what happened," he said, his voice steady despite the storm within him. When I died," his family leaned in, their faces a blend of apprehension and disbelief. Youssef recounted everything: the light, the realms of souls, the messenger's warning, and the terrifying truths he had witnessed. He spoke not as a soldier recounting a battle, but as a man sharing a sacred duty. His words painted vivid pictures, and by the time he finished, his family sat in stunned silence. At first, the reactions were hesitant. His mother, deeply rooted in her faith, clutched her hands together and whispered prayers, tears streaming down her cheeks. "You've been blessed, my son," she said, her voice quivering. His younger brother asked cautious questions, his skepticism thinly veiled. "Are you sure it wasn't a dream? Maybe the brain playing tricks?" But the conviction in Youssef's voice silenced even the doubts he couldn't address. Word of Youssef's experience began to spread, first among his extended family, and then throughout his community. The reactions were as varied as the people who heard his story. Some listened with wide-eyed wonder, finding hope in his words and reassurance in the existence of a higher purpose. A grieving father, who had recently lost his daughter, wept openly, thanking Youssef for affirming his belief that she was in a better place. But not everyone was so receptive. Skeptics accused Youssef of fabricating his tale, chalking it up to a near-death hallucination or the product of an oxygen-starved brain. Others dismissed him outright, wary of a message that challenged their own beliefs. Youssef faced ridicule and disbelief, but he remained resolute. He had seen the truth, and no amount of doubt could shake his mission. For those who truly listened, Youssef's words planted seeds of transformation. Some turned back to their faith, rekindling a connection to the divine they had long neglected. Others began acts of kindness, driven by the knowledge that every choice carries weight. But for some, the fear of what Youssef described lingered, a haunting reminder of the consequences of their actions. Through it all, Youssef's resolve never wavered. He spoke not to convince, but to share. "I don't ask you to believe me," he often said. "I only ask that you reflect on the life you're living and the legacy you'll leave behind." Years passed, and Youssef's life became a testimony to the message he carried. No longer a soldier in the traditional sense, he turned his energy toward peace and reconciliation. His days were spent speaking in mosques, schools, and community centers, sharing his story with anyone willing to listen. He traveled across the region, often walking into rooms filled with skepticism and leaving them in solemn reflection. The horrors of conflict no longer defined Youssef. Instead, he became a beacon of unity, urging others to rise above hatred and division. He spoke passionately about the need for compassion and the importance of understanding that every action, no matter how small, ripples through the lives of others. His message wasn't bound by religion or culture. It was universal. Youssef's experience had changed him profoundly. He no longer saw enemies in those who opposed him, but fellow souls struggling to find their way. He reached out to those he had once fought against, extending a hand of peace. Some rejected him, but others embraced his message, moved by the sincerity in his eyes and the conviction in his voice. The duality of the afterlife, the light and darkness he had witnessed, remained a constant reminder of humanity's capacity for both good and evil. Youssef often reflected on the words of the messenger. Every action has its weight. Every soul has the capacity for redemption. He lived by those words, striving each day to tip the scales toward light. But the weight of his journey was not without cost. Youssef carried the burden of the terrifying truth he had seen, the reality that humanity was teetering on the edge of self-destruction, driven by greed, hatred, and apathy. He often wondered if his message would be enough. Could one man's story change the course of so many lives? In his final years, Youssef recorded his experiences, ensuring that his testimony would outlive him. "I don't know what the future holds," he wrote, "but I have seen what lies beyond. And it is a truth both beautiful and terrifying. We are not judged by the moments we hope will define us, but by the countless choices we make when no one is watching." As Youssef's legacy spread, his message became a haunting yet hopeful call to action. It reminded humanity that life is a fleeting gift, that our actions carry consequences beyond our understanding, and that redemption is always within reach, if only we have the courage to seek it. And so, the soldier who once walked the battlefield now walked the path of peace, his every step a reminder of the light and darkness that exist within us all. The truth he carried would continue to ripple through the hearts of those who heard it, challenging them to look inward and ask, what will your legacy be when the final chapter of your life is written? Want to hear more of this? Then click on the video on the right-hand side, which is even more shocking.